There it is.
There
I
you
saw
go.
the red dot.
All right, then I'm gonna jump in then, and then you guys can take it away.
Go ahead.
So welcome everyone. If this is your first time joining us, everyone will remain muted throughout tonight's presentation, except committee co-chairs and presenters. Following the presentation, co-chairs will call on members of the public who wish to speak. At that time, you can participate by going to the reactions icon and pressing raise hand and not the wave or thumbs up button. And only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're calling from the phone tonight, it's *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chairs call on you. And the chat is for technical support only, for Zoom software problems and challenges, and not to ask questions of the co-chairs. If you have an older version of Zoom, you will need to go to the participants section where you will find the raise hand feature there. And finally, do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we may not see.
Thank you, Max. So today we have a presentation from the New York City Commission on Human Rights. This may sound familiar as the Commission gave the Social Justice Committee a presentation, I believe earlier this week. But this one is a little bit different because the Social Justice Committee was really geared towards workplace and discussing in the professional life. But there's definitely one of the most, I would say the most pressing issue in schools is equity in education. And human rights is a very important aspect of equity. And so tonight we have Chris Smith from New York City Commission on Human Rights to teach us. This presentation is really meant for, I believe, students. And I believe we can all learn something from a student perspective tonight. So if we can unmute Chris, he can take it.
Sure, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, yeah, thank you, and good evening, everyone. Just want to say thank you for having me, first and foremost. This is usually a presentation that is geared towards youth, but as said, like we can all like learn from this presentation as well. So just to introduce myself, my name is Chris Smith. I am the Youth Initiatives Lead Advisor at the Commission on Human Rights. And my role at the Commission is really geared towards like creating and enhancing our youth targeted programming, as well as working on ways to get like more of like youth inclusion into the work that we do at the Commission. So I've been at the Commission for almost 7 years now, and I've done a vast amount of work from like working on some of the investigation side regarding like equal access for people with disabilities to a lot of the youth work that I do now. So I've done a vast amount of things at the Commission. Just wanted to introduce myself and talk about some of the work that I've done. And now I'm going to share, well, am I able to share my screen for a PowerPoint?
Yeah, you should be able to.
I can.
Yeah, you can share your screen now.
Okay, perfect. I'm do that right now. Just a thumbs up to see if people can see it.
You got it.
Perfect. So just as a disclaimer, like this is like just a presentation that's not meant to be like an exhaustive outline on what the law entails. And if you want like specific legal questions, you can feel free to call us directly at 311, ask for the Commission, or our direct number, which I'll give at the end. So just to kind of like start off today, just wanted to like go through some guidelines. That's it. We do want to make sure that we maintain like a safe space. Respect always, like everybody has something to offer the presentation. If you feel like you have like want to address any of the prompts or engage any shape or fashion, we want to be inclusive and respectful of everyone's like thoughts and opinions. Sharing is optional, but we encourage it. I'm a firm believer in I don't like hearing my voice for a long period of time, so I like to engage with like my audience. So yeah, feel free to always share. If there's any questions, feel free to ask. And if there's And just also wanted to stress one of the other guidelines of confidentiality. If there's anything that's shared in space that may be uncomfortable, well, others may be uncomfortable with you sharing outside the space, just making sure that we all can like respect that.
Just so,
Yeah, so-
we're live on YouTube at the moment. So if that has an effect.
Okay. Thank you for that. Wow, didn't know that. So just for outline what we're going to cover today, just an overview of like what we do at the commission and our role as an agency, really, and then talk about some of the key terms that are associated with today's discussion. This presentation is geared towards youth and really talking about how discrimination can intersect with bullying and harassment. So just really showing how like bullying and cyberbullying can be discriminatory and can be something that people can file a complaint with our office about. Talk about like introduce some of the different laws and policies protecting students, as well as some like actions of recourse that you can take if they experience any of these things. Today's goals, we want to make sure that people are knowledgeable about discrimination and harassment and bullying, making sure that people know more about this topic now than they did before I started speaking. So if not, that means I really have not done my job. Also, just want to make sure people are able to identify what discrimination, harassment, and bullying looks like. So being sure to make sure that individuals are able to identify it and know how to take the proper recourse to address those actions. Also providing the tools for people to combat these instances and to continue promoting this conversation in like different spaces such as these. So being sure that there's a lot for all of us to learn, and these type of instances do confront our young people and affect our young people more than we can anticipate. So being able to be in tune with what youth is going through and finding ways to continue this conversation so they can feel secure in addressing these issues. So just an overview of the agency. So we're split up into 4 different divisions. We have our Community Relations Bureau, which is the division that I'm a part of, and our job is really to inform people and provide community education on what people's rights and protections are. So we work with different schools, community groups, faith-based organizations to really continue to bring this information out to the public to make sure people are aware of what their rights are under the human rights law that we enforce in New York City. We also have our Law Enforcement Bureau, which are all of our attorneys. So those are the people that accept the complaints and conduct investigations, as well as bring cases to the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings, and also like conduct commission-initiated cases for tips that may be provided that relate to discrimination. We also have our Office of Mediation and Conflict Resolution, which are people that mediates different disputes between 2 parties. If a person brings a claim of discrimination but does not want to file an official complaint, those cases go to our Office of Mediation with the option of trying to mediate the dispute between the complainant and the respondent. And also our final division is our Office of Chair, which is headed by our Commissioner, Carmelyn P. Morales. And the job of that division is really to work on the legislative and policy side of our law, issue final orders and decisions, and make sure to engage like different stakeholders and like by providing testimony and city council hearings and things of that nature to kind of strengthen that legal aspect of our law. So at the commission, we enforce the human rights law, and with what that entails is really people should not be confronted with discrimination in the areas of employment, in housing, public accommodations. Also, people should not be confronted with discriminatory harassment and bias-based profiling by law enforcement. And as you can see on the screen, these are our protections relate to public accommodations, because schools under the law are considered public accommodations, which are basically like a public place or places that provide a good or service. So examples are schools, taxi cabs, Uber, restaurants. All those are considered public accommodations and cannot deny services or treat you unfairly based on some of these different things. So if people are targeted because of their race, religion, color, age, national origin, citizenship status, all these general protections are covered under all the areas, but there's some that are unique to just housing and others that are unique to just employment, which you'll see in the later slides. So just to continue, public accommodation, further protections, gender identity is also protected under the law, sexual orientation, disability, pregnancy, uniform services, or military status. So all these different, so we have 27 different protected categories under the law, which makes New York City human rights law one of the most expansive human rights laws in the nation. So we have a vast amount of coverages to make sure that New Yorkers are protected from discrimination in New York City. And these are some of our additional protections that are unique to employment. So like arrest and conviction record, salary history, and two of our newest ones at the bottom, sexual reproductive health choices, as well as pre-employment marijuana testing. So all these are protections that people enjoy in New York City and should not be denied employment. Denied employment opportunities, whether it's hiring, promotions, or be fired based off of their what we call protected class status, which are characteristics that describe why people may discriminate against you. And these are the additional protections in housing. Lawful occupation, one of the big ones, lawful source of income, regarding people who are who use government assistance to assist paying their rent, should not be denied or discriminated against when trying to obtain housing based on your lawful source of income. Oh, as I mentioned before, public accommodations are basically providers of goods and services to the general public. So just going to the example, so your grocery stores, government agencies, theaters, anywhere where people can obtain goods or services are considered public accommodations under the law, and people should not be experiencing any forms of discrimination based off of trying to seek services from a public accommodation. And you can see, like, schools is highlighted just based off of just to inform like young people that like you shouldn't be experiencing discrimination in schools, whether it's through administration or other students, and nothing be done to be addressed. So educational institutions, it includes like kindergarten, primary, secondary schools, academies, colleges, and universities, and professional schools, extension courses, and all other educational facilities are considered educational institutions that are covered as a public accommodation. So just some numbers based off of a survey that was done a couple years ago. So the national percentage of high school students that are bullied in high school is 20%. National percentage of high school students that drop out due to bullying is 10%. And in New York City schools, 20% of students have reported that they have been bullied. And just to really like hold on to these numbers, and this is just based off of people reporting to a survey, and we do know that there has been like underreporting. It may not capture everything. So just knowing that young people are confronted with bullying, and just as we transition today, just really show how some forms of bullying relates to discrimination. and how they can kind of go hand in hand, and how that could be an issue that our agency can intervene. So yeah, under like the city's law, the DOE like reports bullying, and just the reason why we created this curriculum to inform young people is just based off of the numbers that we saw based on a report in 2017 of just over 4,000 bullying complaints were reported. So just really seeing that a lot of these instances have been reported, some have been like rectified, others may not have been rectified. And also, as I mentioned before, just the underreporting. Maybe some people are not comfortable in reporting or don't even know how to report instances of like bullying. So just really shows the need of why we do this presentation, to really inform young people on what their what protocols and channels that they have at their disposal to be able to address these issues.
Oh, Chris, one quick.
Yes, of course.
I'm curious. I mean, I think about it. I've got to, think about sort of from a community point of view, how you figure out whether it's working more or working less, or where the problems are. Is there public reporting on that data with regard, say by school or something like that? The number of incidents of reports of bullying?
Yeah, I know that usually the Department of Education usually have those stats posted on their website.
Really?
That's throughout like the school year. Like after like the end of each school year, like they post some form of like statistics on form of like reporting. I don't know what that looks like due to us being in the virtual world, and if we're going to get like a new spin on those numbers, if there are actual reports of bullying in the virtual space. I mean, my assumption could be, we could all make assumptions on what that would look like, but usually pre-pandemic, those statistics are usually posted in a report. Like they have a report like released sometime after the school year.
I'm going to make just if someone knows better, I would find it helpful. I'm assuming if they report statistics, it may be system-wide aggregate statistics rather than numbers by school. I don't know that for a fact, but I've spent a fair amount of time trying to wander around the DOE website and looking for other issues, like, for example, in terms of universal literacy, whether there are data reported on literacy, say by second or third grade. At least to date, if those statistics are available on their website, I haven't found them. That's just a little FYI. You don't have to, sort of validate or otherwise.
Peter, it depends. So I'm sure Chris can explain more, but the way bullying is reported in schools is through a respect for all liaison. There's normally like 2 to 3 in every school, typically guidance counselor, principal, teacher that has high regard with students, somewhere along those lines. I believe it's up to the school whether they want to release those numbers. But Peter, I think they release like system-wide over like the 1.1 million students. I think they release statistics there.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's basically, I actually want to say something similar. Like, I mean, based on the numbers that I've seen, it's usually like system-wide rather than a specific school, or maybe at best with certain instances, you might see particular school districts on where these instances come out of, but I haven't seen like statistics being released from like specific schools. But again, like maybe it's out there. I don't want to say that it's not but I personally haven't seen it.
It may be there. We just haven't found it. All good. Thank
you. So just based off of just showing some other numbers, according to like the Dignity for All Students Act report in 2018, like they showed these 3 reasons being the top 3 for bullying. Bullying based on race, ethnicity or national origin, and gender identity and expression. So just as I mentioned before of how bullying can intersect with discrimination, and how it can be unlawful under the human rights law. And youth don't only have the protocols within their school that they can report as Rami. Did I get your name correct?
Yeah, Rami.
Rami. Okay. Yeah, as Rami mentioned, like with respect for all liaisons, which every school has and must like post and identify by name who that person is for students to address those complaints to, but also can come to our office if the bullying relates to a protected class, such as these three listed up here.
And Peter, those DASA numbers, Dignity for All Students Act, are their public numbers. And a lot of times the comptrollers, not necessarily the city comptroller, but possibly the state or the federal comptroller have like full reports on those numbers. We did a lot of work at my school with specifically around those numbers nationally to see what we could do on a school-based approach.
So yeah, just to kind of now just transition into some of like the key terms that are associated with today's discussion. So and really further explain how bullying can be a human rights issue, right? So schools can be liable in connection with, if like the bullying happens at the school's location, or like regardless of if it's like a school field trip, but and like traveling that's affiliated with the school, like if there's anything form of bullying that happens and schools are not addressing it once they are made aware of it, then that could, schools can be held liable for those instances because it causes a hostile educational environment. So just to really talk about human rights, because that is that's in our name. Human rights, like when we think human rights, we think of rights that belong to all. We think about the right to food or right to shelter. A lot of these different things and how human rights are universal and how people are born with these rights. But just really wanted to like make sure people know that, this is in our name, but our agency is really focused on discrimination. And if people experience discrimination and are targeted based off of the different protected categories that are under the law that I mentioned previous, that those are the instances that we will accept claims on and conduct investigations on. It has to be linked to discrimination. And discrimination is just basically a person or group of people being excluded or treated less well or unfairly because of characteristics that are associated with their identity. Or as I like to say, just keep it simple, being treated unfairly because of who you are, which is really the essence of discrimination. You're being denied employment opportunities, denied opportunity to live in a particular neighborhood, denied services in a certain place just based off of characteristics that make up your identity. Oh, we're really going to harassment, harassment behavior that is unwelcome or unwanted or intimidating and can take many different forms. It could be physical, it could be verbal behavior that is offensive and meant to embarrass and humiliate. And a lot of these instances, we can talk about how they can occur in the workplace, but they also can occur like in public accommodations such as schools, and how it could impact young people in navigating like youth spaces if they're being harassed or targeted like based off of characteristics that make up their identity. So harassment occurs when targets anyone based on a protected class, threatens or intimidates, makes unwelcome physical contact with you, such as touching, patting, pinching. A lot of these different things can be like forms of harassment. And just to really talk about like under our law, discriminatory harassment, like any form of like yeah, any form of like discriminatory behavior that it's like that hints towards like a threat or harm can be discriminatory harassment. And those are cases that we can take. But if there's actual physical contact, that is no longer a civil thing, that's criminal, and those should be reported to the police. But anything that incites some form of harm, such as a Muslim woman walking on a subway station with her hijab and another person coming up, take off your hijab or I will do this to you, that is, without doing the action, that would be more so a form of discriminatory harassment because of that threat that is towards that person's religious identity. So with bullying, bullying's pattern of behavior that is repeated over time that can cause like harm, whether physical or emotional. It's deliberate or unprovoked, and it usually involves a power imbalance. So just really sticking to the key of like repeated instances regarding bullying, because there are forms of conflict that aren't bullying, but just really stressing on the repeated instances or like the particular targeting, like based off of someone's identity, whether it's their color, citizenship status, gender identity, gender expression, and other disability, as well as like other different protected categories. All right, so with cyberbullying, we like that has been like a thing that's just we're in the digital world, just the use of technology to inflict forms of bullying and targeting and individuals inflicting the cyberbullying can remain anonymous. So just really thinking about how bullying evolved over time versus when some like back in decades past where technology was not as advanced and you kind of you knew the school bully, versus now when you're in the digital space and people can remain anonymous, create different accounts, and really target you based off of, again, your characteristics that make up your identity or your protected class status. And just some of the examples that we're even seeing, like since we transitioned to the virtual space due to the pandemic, like different like Zoom bombings before like Zoom like made improvements to like security when people wanted to host Zoom meetings, where like people would crash Zoom meetings, say a racial slur or something that was discriminatory. There's a lot of these different things that have been happening, like since the trend, especially early in the pandemic. Just a lot of, different forms of targeting, like based off of your identity. And just to really talk about like the difference between conflict and bullying, as I kind of hinted towards before, like just thinking of like a disagreement where both sides express their views, like behavior usually stops after one person realize that that the fight could be continuous or like stops before it escalates further. But sometimes conflict can like lead to bullying. So, and just as I mentioned with bullying, it's like there's intent and there's usually a power imbalance, whether it's like social forms of bullying of like people having having an amount of popularity and excluding someone from the group versus just a simple conflict over a sports game or something of that nature. Just really showing like the difference between like what a conflict is and what bullying is, and just really judging it by like the intent and like repeated instances over time. So just really showing like some of the impacts of this discrimination, harassment, and bullying. May cause young people to drop out of school, loss of interest in activities, a sense of like helplessness, could result in forms of violence, where a lot of these things keep on happening and the response that they feel like maybe at best for them is responding in violence. Could also result in like poor academic performance. So just seeing some of the impacts and the aftermath of like experiencing these different things, and just to really talk about discrimination and based off of the different things that we have been seeing for in the prior presidential administration, just the rise and increase in how that is impacting our young people as well, which isn't always talked about how some of these instances have like affected young people in their space where they come to learn, they come to be around friends, and enjoy like an intimate space with just them. So just really talking about like some of the different types of bullying and how it can manifest. So it can be from administration to student, as well as student to student, staff to student, and just even talk, as mentioned before, like digitally or electronically, just all the things that we have seen in the digital age can be like other ways of like how bullying can be exercised. And just to really talk about the obstacles of why people may not report or address bullying. It could be, again, lack of awareness or rights. Just again, like an example of like thinking about the respect for all liaisons. There have been many times where I've done these presentations in schools and students did not even know what a respect for all liaison is. Didn't even know that there was even a protocol to report bullying in their school or any form of harassment in their school. So just the lack of awareness of what resources are available to them, lack of community support. So may not have a trusted adult or a trusted person that they feel like they can talk to about these things. Also fearing like personal safety or retaliation, which are all forms of like obstacles in reporting a lot of these instances. And just since I mentioned retaliation, under the human rights law, retaliation is prohibited. So if anybody files a complaint with us, whether we find probable cause or no probable cause in it, people cannot be retaliated against for filing a complaint or filing a claim with the commission. So, and if anybody experiences any form of retaliation, they can file a retaliation complaint with our office as well. So just to show like some of the different laws and policies that like protect people. So as I mentioned, like the New York City Human Rights Law, which is the law that we enforce. You have like the Dignity for All Students Act at the state level, as well as the city level. And then you have the Respect for All initiative that's within DOE schools. So there's a lot of, and some of these things, like these policies, like correlate in certain areas. Some have like additional protections. Like, for example, just thinking about the form of bullying that you may face in schools. If a child is targeted based off of being overweight, weight is not a protected class under the human rights law, but that is something that the Department of Education can address through like their Respect for All initiative. So just thinking of like there's areas where we can connect like due to discrimination and that's targeting your like particular characteristic that targets your identity, as well as there's some areas where some of these other laws may be better to take advantage of than others. So just a kind of transition, because I want to make sure that there are times for like any additional questions people have, like just showing like, yeah, there are steps that people can take. You can report it to a teacher, Respect for All liaison, guidance counselor or principal. And sometimes, usually the guidance counselor or principal or a particular teacher is the Respect for All liaison, depending on the school. It's not like one size fit all policy. It's usually school based on who is selected, and people can find out their respectful liaison on the DOE website. They type in their particular school. They usually have that information listed. You can talk to a trusted adult. It can involve parents or a legal guardian. Report the incident like through the DOE website, and just also being mindful of when reporting. Be mindful of like who, what, when, where, and why, and being as like descriptive as possible. Yeah, being able to recount some of the events that have taken place, like if you have dates or location of where you experience these things, just being able to like record that, whether it's like it's as simple as writing it down. I mean, there are some people, since again we have iPhones, people that may record certain situations, but it can be as simple as just writing down what happened, just so whenever you decide, or if you decide to report these instances, you're able to like remember what particular thing has happened, when it happened, where and why and who. And again, you can also submit an online form. You can also email the Office of Safety and Youth Development, OSYD. The United Federation of Teachers hotline is available. So there's many different channels that are available to young people if they experience forms of bullying that they can use to file a complaint on. And if there are issues like related to gender-based harassment, schools do have a Title IX coordinator that can also be found on DOE's website with a particular teacher's name or a particular staff person's name, because not all the time that there are teachers. So again, DOE does have a protocol when it comes to reporting. So if they receive like a report on bullying, harassment, or discrimination, they must, well, again, if it's reported, school principal must then investigate within 5 days of getting the report. The principal will determine whether the behavior is bullying, harassment, or discrimination. Parents of the students involved will be notified. An investigation, and the principals must take the necessary actions to make sure the behavior stops. So there is a set protocol of like certain times and deadlines on like when things must be implemented. So if a respectful liaison receives the notice of like incidents of bullying or harassment, they have, I believe 2 days to report that to the principal. And then the principal must continue the investigation from there. So just really showing that if reports are given and they aren't given to the notice of the proper authorities at the time, then you can, like I said, also call the commission, and we will make sure, and we can also intervene in that regard. So again, you can, there's any form of assistance you need from our agency, can call 311, ask for the Commission on Human Rights, or call our info line directly, which is 212-416-0197. Our agency speaks over 30 different languages, so we are able to provide language services. And if we do not provide a particular language that you need, we have a language line that we use, the Voyant system, where we're able to have an interpreter that'll be able to speak your language, because we want to make sure that all people are being served, and we cannot turn you away based off of not being able to serve your language. And this is just a breakdown of the complaint process. If people file a complaint, there's an intake that's conducted by our law enforcement bureau. Then a complaint is filed. an investigation. It can go through mediation, or if you don't want to go through an investigation. So investigation is conducted, and based off the investigation, make a determination whether there's probable cause, meaning that there's more than likely that discrimination has happened, or no probable cause, meaning that there's less likely discrimination has happened. So we find no probable cause in it. That means that we're not saying that there's nothing, like discrimination didn't happen in this case. It's just that there hasn't been anything that's really shown that discrimination has happened. But again, if there's new information that you receive that you have to show, you can appeal that decision. If it is probable cause, can go through the administrative trials and hearing through like our administrative trial. Then based off of that, reports and recommendations are given by the administrative judge for the final decision in order to be made by our commissioners. And based on this, we have the enforcement power to penalize people that violate our law up to $250,000, which is just to the city. And we also have power based off of, based off the case, if to like get emotional distress damages, as well as like back pay if the form of discrimination has caused them to like be fired or lose their job or cause them to quit. So on a case-by-case basis, we can impose like further remedies, and also making sure that people that violate the law play a role in like healing the communities that they harm. So looking at the law from like more of a restorative lens rather than just penalizing. So it could be taking a training, it could be community service within a particular community. So there's many different remedies that we use at the commission to make sure that people are not only deterred from violating the law, but making sure that they are well aware and understand like their responsibilities as well as their rights under the law. And from there, that is the conclusion of my presentation. If there are any questions, I'll feel free to ask, and I'll definitely address them as they come in.
Well, I'll start with a comment, and that's to give everyone else an opportunity to formulate a question, because we definitely would welcome them. But it occurs to me, I mean, you covered the territory very clearly and comprehensively. And at the same time, as I'm listening to that, I'm thinking this has to be a problem, at least in some magnitude, like I'm going to say almost everywhere. I don't know if it's a 1 to 2 to 3% problem, or a, and I don't know what these numbers mean. Incidentally, I call it poetic math, or a 25, 30% problem, or what have you. But it also strikes me immediately that if you were to try to understand, say in the Upper East Side, where it's a problem, and if you're thinking in particular, at least for the moment with regard to schools, that schools would also likely be, and I can understand this, and I'm not sure it's inappropriate, a bit hesitant to publish statistics, to sort of point to the degree to which it is a problem. And, whatever the numbers are, it's not clear whether that's a big problem or a small problem, and how serious the incident needs to be in order to get reported in a statistic. So it's kind of like, you've helped me understand the territory, and I have no clue as to the magnitude of the issue or the concern, let alone thinking about whether we as a community can be doing something to support our schools. So that's a big question. And anybody here, I don't expect that's one that you, Chris, in particular can answer, although you may have a thought on it, but I'd be interested if any of our community people, and that's everybody. I see some people from the community board. I see someone from our social justice committee. But if anybody has a comment or a question or an observation, I would welcome it.
I'll jump in. I actually had a question for Chris, so sort of unrelated to your point, Peter.
Sure.
I have a lot of thoughts sort of long-term about that. Chris, so thank you so much for the incredibly helpful presentation. So I have two questions. The first is whether kids, like how often are kids across the city getting this presentation? Like, so is this something that they walk through on their own, or is someone like yourself actually talking them through this and going through it live?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so we work with different schools throughout the city. I mean, some of it is just us establishing relationships with different schools and like coming into prior to the pandemic, we were in schools like going through this information, but now we're conducting these workshops virtually. So being able to discuss with students like the instances that they're like what are they particularly experiencing like in schools. Some of them are more open than others, obviously just based off of the content and the subject, but that's so we're really in like many different youth spaces. We could be in schools, we could be meeting with like different youth groups, conducting some of these presentations in like different summer programs. And we have on our website, we have a vast amount of different like youth workshops. Some that are like specific to like just such as like bullying, harassment. We have workshops like geared towards race, have something that's geared towards LGBTQI issues, something that's directed to like gender, specifically like women's advancements in human rights. So we have a vast amount of different workshops that we conduct like in different schools citywide.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, my second question is, you gave those stats about 20% of New York City high school kids being bullied, which is staggering given, just how many kids we have. Do you have those statistics for K-8? It occurs to me that I imagine bullying is a big problem at the middle school level as well.
Yeah. Do I have them on record? I don't, but I know that they're definitely present.
Okay.
It's just because I know that there was something that was like on again the Department of Education's website that just really breaks down like the forms of bullying or like different form of like reports based off of I believe grade level, but I know at least the different school districts.
Okay, thank you.
So I can show you like particular numbers that come out of the school district. But I want to say that they do have like breakdown in like different grades, but I don't want to confirm that and that not be true. But I do know that there were numbers that like were geared towards particular school districts, even though it may not be talking about the particular school.
Adding on a little bit, that a lot of what principals are tasked with when dealing with reporting and there's very strict protocols when with reporting and investigating and the whole process that you outlined before, which I really did like that graphic. And it really outlines it. It's a really complex process that a lot of people don't realize. They think, hey, I'm just going to report this to my principal and he's going to deal with it. But there's a lot of things that principals can't do. They really have to investigate and they really have to wait for guidance. So a lot of what the DOE, specifically superintendents, they recommend that principals reach out to DOE Central for guidance. With regard to a lot of issues. And Peter, a lot of the information that you're thinking about is actually like the data's there. So there's 3 or 4 systems that principals report bullying, harassment, crimes, police involvement, all of that. There's a few different systems that are all mandated and governed and taken care of by the DOE. And sometimes, occasionally, every few years, you see an audit report by a comptroller. And so a lot of the information is actually private. So a lot of like specifics on bullying, because every instance is different. You can't think in your, like, you could think of like 8 or 9 examples if you sat here and thought, hey, what are some examples of bullying? And so it's a huge spectrum. So a lot of the data is a little bit complex and it's easily misconstrued. And so Chris, I have a question. Does the commission have a little bit more leeway and or not so much power, but they're operationally allowed to expand investigation? So if I come to you and I say, hey, I reported this to my school, they had an investigation, and they said that unfortunately they reached out to Central and they can't do anything about it, or it's not an outcome that's comfortable with me as a victim or someone who has experienced bullying. Can I go to the commission and say, hey, this is what happens, what can you guys do?
Okay, great question. And yes, I mean, yeah, you can come to the commission. I think there have been like instances where we have received like complaints from youth regarding instances, but along with the parent or legal guardian if they're under 18, because that's to file an official complaint. If you got to be 18 or over, but if you're under 18, you have to have a parent or legal guardian like file a complaint on your behalf. So yeah, I think if like the outcome is still pending, you can like file a complaint with us as well, and maybe that will like help speed up the process a little bit. I don't think I can confirm that it will, and I don't think that at least to my knowledge, I don't know if we ever had that experience where people file a complaint after not getting a particular outcome that they were looking for. But again, you can like file complaints like separately with like the DOE as well as the commission.
Okay, thank you.
Marco has a question.
Thank you, Peter. I'd like to ask a question. I don't want to give a political issue right here, but the last administration, the Trump administration, this president was bullying everywhere. Whoever is coming against him, he attacked, and any race. So my question is, you were a kid, seeing that the president doesn't have no action, how do you expect to enforce your rules if the person that's supposed to give example doesn't obey anything, and he can get away for everything? I'm not attacking the president. I'm trying to ask the question, how was this period of time? How increased this bullying? Because if I'm the bully, well, the president does, why not me? If I were bullied, well, if the president does do, I have to accept that. So if you want to process somebody else, the question is, why you process me? And the president that's supposed to give the example is he can get away with everything. Again, I'm not going against the president. I'm going is how your system, well established, it works, because apparently doesn't have no base, no foundations under which you enforce your rules. So that is my major concern in that direction. How was this period of time, and how you deal, what experience you learn for that period of time? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Marco. I think that's really a big point. And as I said before, I've been here for 7 years. So so I was here years before Trump officially got in office, and we did see an increase in discrimination complaints, as well as we saw an increase in attacks on different communities. So we saw a rise in anti-Semitic acts. We saw a rise in anti-Asian acts, especially it within the pandemic, and based off of the rise in like anti-Asian racism, since Donald Trump basically called the COVID-19 virus the Chinese virus. Yeah, because of that, we created like a COVID-19 response team to record those to make sure that we're responding to those instances as soon as possible. So based on, and you definitely have a point. We had a president of the United States that was acting as a bully, saying things that were discriminatory and targeting different communities. And we saw the impacts of that in like New York City, whether it was like on the street with adults as well as youth. Because there have been times where myself and my team had to respond to different instances in schools, whether it was like forms of sexual harassment or forms of like bullying based off of race or gender identity and sexual orientation. So yes, we have seen a rise in that, and which is why our work is definitely important to make sure that youth don't only understand that they have rights and protections, but being able to be mindful of what their responsibilities are under the law so they aren't committing acts of discrimination that's unlawful.
The second question that I have is, under the 18 years old, if the child or teenager bully or was bullied, you're gonna follow some procedure. Do you have anything, because at that age, people, they can do mistakes and they can go back in the right track. Because if you just punish with some denomination that's bully, you lose forever that person. But if you help the bully, do you have any programs? And do you help the people that has been bullied? Because the issue is not only to punish, but the issue is to recuperate this person back to the society. Because the more bullies you create, the more trouble you have in the future. And the less that you tackle at the beginning, the better for the society.
Yeah, good, great question. And to go on to a better point, with my experience here, we never imposed a penalty on a child under 18. So that's never happened. We did receive like concerns from like students in like particular schools, and our way that we respond to that is really going in the schools, whether it's like spending a day conducting workshops or even hosting like restorative circles to be able to unpack some of these issues. So we use our programming as a way to respond to some of the issues that of bullying and harassment that may be in schools, because as you mentioned, penalizing can only take you so far. So you want to make sure that you kind of provide like some form of restoration and being able to have young people understand why these actions are wrong, rather than like just penalizing the student. I can give like an example of a school I went to, like, we responded to in Brooklyn. This was a couple years ago, where like there was like different anti-Semitic messages that were spread on social media, and it was impacting the school culture. And what we did was like we went in, and this was middle school, so we just went in, we spoke with the youth. I mean, just kind of like conducting like a different presentation, let them know that this is the information out there. This is what discrimination is. This is what it looks like. This is what happens when you violate the law. And just making sure young people knew that they had recourse and didn't have to take acts of discrimination. And also for them to learn like they are responsible for making sure that they do not commit these acts, or let them know that some of these acts are discrimination. And sometimes, and I know this is a long-winded answer, but you just asked like a very big question that's, I believe, is important to address. We want to make sure that the youth are again, like learning that there are things that are discrimination that they may not know, because some people don't, like, not everybody violates the law intentionally. There are some people that violate the law like unintentionally. And I can give just a quick example of that. A restaurant placing an ad looking for, saying waitress wanted. That is a form of gender-based discrimination. But, or saying waiter wanted, because waiter and waitress, they're gendered. So just kind of thinking, but a lot of people don't know that. So that's not that restaurant being like malicious. That's a restaurant placing an ad and not really knowing that that's discriminatory. Same thing applies with youth. There are some things that they may do that they think is like just teasing and just having fun, right, but not knowing that it could be discrimination. So we want to make sure that we're providing that education on what their responsibilities are, so they know that this is not okay and there are penalties to this, as well as making sure that they are like integrated into like that into an environment, comfortable environment in school.
Thank you.
Do we have other questions from other board members or members of the public?
I'm going to pose one question, and again, always open to have other people think and come up with questions. I'm thinking about specific interventions. I mean, and it could be any case, like the school you mentioned, the middle school in Brooklyn. And I can imagine, I mean, there's providing presentations, which is information, which is at least helpful because it begins to give some context and some sense of like maybe boundaries and process and protections. But then when there are particular issues, I can imagine there are interventions either with, you know, a specific set of individuals, you know, bullies, perpetrators, and victims. Do you also do interventions like, you know, for larger groups? And I mean, a group could be 6 or 12, or it could be a class or what have you. Because again, I'm thinking these are difficult conversations to have. You'll know that much better than I. But I'll add one anecdote. I mean, I've been a member of a board, and I consider it a very, what shall I say, professional board. Happens to have to do with, among other things, you know, dealing with the criminal justice system and reentry in the community, and the people who are on this board are absolutely stellar, in my estimation. I mean, I look up to just about every one of them. And 2 days ago, I found out that there was a woman on that, and actually probably more than one, who feel like, you don't take this badly, Chris, there are a bunch of old white males on the board who, I'm teasing you when I say that, a bunch of old white males on the board who frankly do not treat, you know, are not open to, or equally open to, feedback and input from the women on the board. And I have to tell you, I was an absolute shock. But so that says, you know, it may not be visible. You know, how do you go about surfacing it? And then when you've surfaced it, you know, what kind of interventions can be appropriate? I know that's sort of a broad question. I don't know if you can make a, you know, sort of a general answer.
Yeah, most definitely. I think it's just a matter of, I mean, just with our experiences with having these conversations with young people, and having this conversation in any setting is always a tough conversation, especially when you're talking about experiences of discrimination and you see a lot of people's personal experiences come into play in the space, which is why, like, in any space I'm in, I always mention confidentiality, because you don't know how like personal some things are to people that are being shared.
Right.
So I think after just kind of steering that conversation and through like prompted questions and drawing some of those things out, like being able to like guide a conversation where sometimes you may not, like, I've been in spaces, because we also have like a peer mediation program that we work with schools on, like creating like a program in the school where youth can take the lead in addressing conflict with like their fellow students. And I tell, like, whenever I conduct those trainings, I tell youth all the time, your goal is not to solve the problem. Your goal is to facilitate a conversation between people so they can hear each other. And they may not agree after they leave that table, but at least they were able to hear each other in a way that was productive, and that was like in like an organized and confined space that nobody felt less than. And I think that that's really the best way that I could really answer that question, and how we can continue like these conversations, is really being open to others' feedback and trying to find ways where we can address it. And it all boils down to like bringing people to the table to really have these conversations, which are never easy. And as I said, I've been doing this for years, and I struggle with having some of these conversations as well, because everybody's different. There's some people that aren't like ready to talk about certain things, or feel that what's the point of even sharing because I won't be heard. So like you get that in spaces as well. So just being able to create an environment where you bring people to the table, you give them the opportunity to at least hear each other. And some things that you hear you may not like, or you may find shocking, but just being able to, okay, let us regroup and let's figure out how we can like move forward. Like there's some things that you're feeling, there's some things that I'm feeling. Like how can we like create an environment that's a little more inclusive for us to get our needs met?
I want to thank you for that. I think it was very well said, and I took notes. So, I'm not sure how this will work going forward, but I appreciate your input.
Oh, no problem. I thank you all. I definitely thank you all for having me. Like this is definitely something I always enjoy, like just being able to speak in different spaces. And for one, as I said before, I don't like hearing my voice for too long. So I definitely really appreciate the question portion more than the presentation.
So want to be respectful of your time, Chris, but if you don't mind taking one more question, it looks like Marco has his hand up.
Oh, no problem at all. I'll take it. I can take another question.
I'm going to ask the question about, you mentioned human rights, and then you said housing. What exactly would it mean?
You said human rights and housing?
Yes. What is involved? What is the law in that direction?
Okay, so basically, if you experience discrimination, whether trying to like apply for some form of housing, whether you're trying to seek an apartment or looking to buy a home, and you're denied those opportunities because of things such as your race, your religion, your national origin, some of the other protected classes that we mentioned before, then that is against the law. Like meaning that you cannot be treated unfairly when trying to obtain a home or apartment, or obtain services like in an apartment based off of a certain, based off of like based off your protected class status. So an example.
My question is, I understand that part. It's not part of the human right to have a standard established by the system, and most of the people live in under a substandard of housing. So doesn't cover the human rights. Doesn't cover the human rights people without no house to be in the streets. Doesn't cover that that the government in some way are negligent to produce affordable housing. Doesn't cover all of this or not, or just only what you mentioned?
Great question. And I mean, just to kind of like tailor it back to like the beginning of the conversation when I was talking about human rights. Yes, when we think of human rights, we think of like the basic human rights such as like right to food, right to shelter. Unfortunately, like, our law only covers discrimination. So, but if people are denied housing based off of that, which could result in the homelessness or homeless, like, housing status is a protection under our law that covers like people who are homeless that may be targeted by like law enforcement based off of them being homeless, that could be a violation under our law as well. So just thinking about, yeah, just housing in general. And we know that New York City is a very pricey city, and it's hard to find housing in the city, even with working a job. So, but which that is a whole another issue that will keep us on here forever. But yeah, like but yeah, if someone is like looking for housing but are denied housing based off of a discriminatory reason, that's when we could get involved. But nothing really beyond that, unfortunately.
Thank you.
I'm not sure is that all the questions that may be?
I think so.
Yeah, I want to thank you again, Chris. And in
Yeah.
fact, I'm going to share a little internal learning, and I'm a little bit of self-disclosure. I'm actually shocked to discover this in myself. In that incident that I just described, first of all, I mean, I want to emphasize for what it's worth. I mean, there are at least half a dozen of the men on that committee who I look up to. I aspire to be as fine a public servant as they are. And then I got this shocking revelation, you know, that some, not all, but at least some of there are about 5 women on the board, clearly have an issue. My response was to get reactive, which I realize, as I have a chance to reflect on it, does mean precisely that I'm part of the problem. Because as you just pointed out, my objective, and this was so helpful what you said, at least at one level, my objective should be to hear them, hopefully non-reactively, so that we can actually have a respectful conversation. And so, you know, I just want to raise my hand and say, at least in one small measure, I got it tonight. So thank you. Thank you for everything you shared. It's really quite helpful. Any other comments or so on? You know, Rami, Taina, do you want to make any last comments? I know we all really want to thank you for your contribution and for the work you do day in and day out. So Chris.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I would just echo that. Thank you for your time. You've given us over an hour of your time, really helpful. And I have to say, just as a graduate of New York City public schools who, you know, didn't have all of these, what it looks like have been really expanded resources throughout the school system to support students who you might be facing discrimination. I'm just really happy and proud that the city has so many resources for students to access, you know, should they feel discriminated against or bullied in school. So just feeling really proud that we're doing so much as a city to address this.
Thank you, Chris. I'll echo that.
I saw applause from Sandra, and I will certainly, you know, add to that. Thank you, Chris.
I'll probably be in touch with either you or the commission to get you guys to have a presentation at my school, because it is definitely needed there. And I think everyone can benefit from the presentation and the discussion that goes along with it.
Yeah, no, most definitely. I would definitely love to like come out to your school and really talk about this. And I thank you all for your time. Again, my job is complete because I'm just glad people are able to take away something from the presentation. Because I'm a firm believer if we don't take something from each other, then I personally haven't done my job. So I really appreciate you all inviting me into your space to really have this conversation with you all. And I definitely look forward to connecting with some of you all soon.
Terrific. Thank you again. Right. And good night all, and thank you all for participating.
All right. Thank you.
Everyone. Have a good night.
Great.